Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Ever had that moment when you realize you're just the backup plan in your own family? I lived in that moment for 32 damn years, and believe me, it never got easier to swallow. It was like breathing through a straw, like every small celebration or proud moment of mine had to squeeze past Ryan's bigger, shinier victories. I was the older brother by 2 years, but if you asked anyone in our town, they would have sworn Ryan was the golden boy and I was just the shadow trailing behind him. The first real memory I have of it was when I turned 8. I had saved for months to buy the second-hand bike from the neighbor down the street, a rusty old thing with a seat that wobbled and pedals that squeaked louder than the old church bell. I loved that bike like it was made of gold because I earned it myself. Then Ryan turned 6, and for his birthday, my parents surprised him with a brand new, bright red Schwinn, complete with racing stripes and a little horn that squealed every time he pressed it. The look on his face was pure joy, and the look on mine was pure acid. I sat there clapping for him, pretending I was happy, while my chest burned with something I didn't have a name for back then. It wasn't just the bike. It was Christmas mornings where Ryan's pile of presents towered over mine like a skyscraper next to a shack. It was birthday parties where he got the clown, the balloons, the magician, while I got a homemade cake and a pat on the head. It was school plays where Mom and Dad sat front row for Ryan's 3-line performance, but somehow always got stuck in traffic when it was my turn to walk on stage. I learned early not to expect too much, and then later, not to expect anything at all. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that I didn't care, that I was tougher than that. I told myself that Ryan was younger, maybe they just thought he needed more attention. I repeated that lie so many times it almost started to feel true, the way you can stare at a word until it stops looking like a real word. But every once in a while, it would sneak up on me, a birthday they forgot, a science fair they missed, a graduation photo where my side of the audience seats stayed painfully empty and the old bitterness would flare up again like a wound that never healed right. You might think, well, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you call them out? But when you grow up believing that you're the afterthought, you start to believe that speaking up won't change anything. You start to think maybe you deserve it, maybe you really are less important, less lovable, less worthy of first place. And let me tell you, once you swallow that kind of poison, it doesn't just sit in your stomach, it leaks into everything you are. I wasn't perfect either, not by a long shot. I got into trouble a few times, broke a neighbor's window with a baseball, talked back to teachers when I thought they were being unfair. Ryan, on the other hand, never got caught doing anything wrong. He was the angel, the prodigy, the walking proof that my parents were doing something right. Whenever he messed up, they smoothed it over like it never happened, while I still got grounded for things I didn't even do sometimes. The worst part wasn't even the gifts or the punishments or the attention. It was the quiet moments, the everyday betrayals that chipped away at me. Like when my mom introduced us to her friends and she'd spend 5 minutes bragging about Ryan's baseball trophies, his straight A's, his bright future, and then, almost as an afterthought, she'd say, oh, and David's working hard too. Working hard at what? Nobody ever asked. Nobody cared enough to find out. By the time I was in high school, I stopped inviting them to my games, my recitals, my award ceremonies. I figured it was better to not expect them and be right than to hope they'd show and be crushed all over again. Ryan got a brand new car for his 16th birthday, a shiny silver Toyota Corolla with a big red bow on top. I got the old Ford pickup that barely ran anymore, handed to me with a shrug and a well, it still drives. Maybe some of you are thinking, hey, at least you got something, right? But it's not about the car. It's never just about the car. It's about what the car represents, the silent hierarchy in our family where Ryan's dreams were investments and mine were inconveniences. Where his mistakes were stepping stones and mine were confirmation of what they always thought about me deep down. Still, I didn't cut them off. I stayed around. I showed up for Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings, smiling through gritted teeth, pretending it was enough to be tolerated when what I really wanted was to be cherished. There were moments, tiny moments, when I thought maybe things would change. Like when I got accepted into college on a scholarship, not a word of congratulations. Ryan announced he was taking a gap year to travel, and they threw him a party. It got harder to pretend, harder to swallow, and even harder to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it, because favoritism is 1,000 little paper cuts, not one big dramatic scene. You sound crazy trying to describe it to outsiders, like you're whining about nothing. But every little slight, every missed opportunity, every moment you were treated like the family's second-string backup piles up until it's a weight you can't carry anymore. By the time I hit 30, I was already exhausted. Working 2 dead-end jobs, living in a crappy apartment where the heater barely worked, still chasing approval I knew deep down was never going to come. And still, a stupid part of me thought maybe if I just stuck it out, if I just proved myself enough, someday they'd see me. But they didn't. And what came next would prove it beyond any shadow of a doubt. The hurt didn't fade with age. It festered. You would think that by the time you hit your 30s, life would start to feel a little more stable, like maybe you would finally outrun all the old ghosts from your childhood, but in my case, it felt like the same old story had just moved into a crappier neighborhood. I was working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, one bussing tables at a dingy diner that smelled like burnt coffee and regret, and the other stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store where the fluorescent lights made you feel like a bug trapped in a jar. Most days, I barely had enough energy to drag myself home and collapse onto the second-hand couch I had rescued from a curbside giveaway. The fridge in my apartment was the saddest sight you could imagine. A few cracked eggs, half a loaf of bread that was starting to grow that weird green fuzz, and a bottle of cheap ketchup that I sometimes used to dress up a packet of ramen noodles like I was some kind of broke gourmet chef. Every month the rent notice would slide under my door like a slap in the face, and every month I would juggle the overdue electric bill against the even more overdue credit card payments, hoping somehow neither one would catch fire long enough for me to scrape together another paycheck. Meanwhile, Ryan, my dear golden boy brother, was out there finding himself on the family's dime. First it was culinary school in New York, which he dropped out of after 2 semesters because the vibe wasn't right. Then it was a startup company he launched with 3 of his college buddies, which tanked so fast it might have broken some kind of record. And after that, it was art school in Los Angeles, which mostly seemed to involve him posting filtered selfies with graffiti murals and latte art. Every time he stumbled, every time he flaked out or gave up or wandered off to chase the next shiny dream, Mom and Dad were right there with the safety net, clapping like proud seals and telling him how brave he was for following his passions. I tried not to let it eat me alive, but it did in slow, gnawing bites. There were days I wanted to scream into the void, days when I looked at the clock during a double shift and realized I was burning away the best years of my life just trying to stay afloat, while he got standing ovations for staying the same spoiled kid he had always been. There was one afternoon, I remember it clear as day, when the muffler on my junker car finally gave up the ghost halfway through my delivery route. I sat there in the parking lot of a rundown strip mall, watching smoke curl up from under the hood, feeling completely and utterly defeated. That night, stomach growling because payday was still 2 days away, and I had exactly $3.17 to my name, I did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I called home and asked for help. It wasn't even much, just enough to fix the car so I could keep working, so I wouldn't lose my job and end up sleeping under a bridge somewhere. Mom answered, cheerful and distracted like always, and when I explained what was going on, there was this long pause on the other end of the line that told me everything I needed to know. She sighed, a heavy, world-weary sigh like I was a burden she had hoped she was done carrying, and said, David, honey, we're kind of tight right now. We just sent Ryan a little extra to help with his rent in LA. Maybe next month? Maybe next month. Maybe when hell freezes over. Maybe when pigs fly. I thanked her anyway, hung up the phone, and stared at the cracked paint on the ceiling until my eyes blurred over. That was the night something hardened inside me, something that had been soft and hopeful for way too damn long. I realized, in a way I couldn't unrealize, that help was always going to be a one-way street in our family, and I was standing on the wrong end of it. Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you work, you're invisible to the people who should notice the most? What would you have done in my shoes? Comment below, I want to hear your stories, because I sure as hell felt like I was drowning and nobody even noticed I was gone under. Things got worse after that. More missed bills, more nights of counting pennies to decide between gas or groceries, more humiliations stacked like dirty dishes I didn't have the strength to wash. I stopped calling home altogether because every time I heard about Ryan's latest adventure, skydiving in New Zealand, yoga retreats in Bali, wine tours in Tuscany, it felt like they were rubbing my face in everything I would never have. Mom would leave these chirpy voicemails sometimes, talking about how proud they were that Ryan was really finding himself, and how one day they were sure I'd catch a break too, like my life was some broken vending machine that just needed a good shake. Dad didn't bother much anymore. A few texts here and there, stiff and formal, like he was checking off a box on a to-do list. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I would sit in the dark and imagine what it would feel like to be Ryan for just one day, to have the world handed to me on a silver platter, to stumble and fall and know there would be hands ready to catch me, to be seen and loved and celebrated just for existing. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't picture it. It was like trying to imagine the sun when you've only ever known the dark. Then came the phone call that broke me. The call came on a Thursday evening, one of those grimy, gray-smeared nights when the city feels like it's been crying all day, and all you want is to get home, kick your shoes off, and maybe eat something that doesn't taste like desperation. I had just finished my shift at the diner, hands reeking of bleach and fryer grease, feet screaming in protest, when my phone buzzed against my hip. It was Mom, and for a split second, just one stupid, hopeful second, I thought maybe she was calling to check in on me, to ask how I was holding up, to maybe, just maybe, say she missed me. Her voice was bright, a little too bright, like she was selling a house she knew had termites in the walls. David, honey, you won't believe it. We just have the most exciting news. I leaned against the crumbling brick of the alley behind the diner, letting the drizzle soak into my jacket, telling myself to breathe, telling myself to expect nothing. I said, "What's up?" and braced for impact. "We bought Ryan a first-class trip around the world," she said, her voice practically vibrating through the phone, the kind of excitement you reserve for weddings or winning the lottery or maybe meeting your first grandchild. He's been working so hard lately. Poor thing. He really needs to recharge before his next big thing. There was a roaring in my ears, a rushing, ugly sound like a dam breaking somewhere deep inside of me. I said nothing because there was nothing to say that would not end with me screaming until my voice broke. She barreled on, oblivious, filling the silence with details that stabbed sharper than any knife: luxury hotels in Paris, private tours of the Great Wall, personal guides in Morocco, helicopter rides over the Grand Canyon. Every word was another brick sealing me out of a house I never really belonged in. At some point, I must have made a noise, a grunt, a cough, anything to signal I was still on the line, because she finally paused long enough to throw in the afterthought that would live rent-free in my mind forever. And of course, she chirped, "If you ever want to come visit, David, we still have that old couch in the basement." "You're always welcome, sweetheart." The basement couch. The one with the sagging springs and the weird stain nobody ever talked about. My brother got the world, and I got a basement couch that smelled like mildew and old regrets. I don't remember much after that. I think I said something polite, because God forbid I ruin their joy with my messy, inconvenient feelings. I hung up, walked back to my car, and just sat there staring at the steering wheel until the cold seeped into my bones. There was no anger yet, not the kind you can scream and punch and throw things over. No, what I felt was worse. It was a quiet kind of devastation, the kind that doesn't burn but freezes you in place, makes you question if you even exist outside of the spaces they left for you. I thought about all the nights I skipped dinner so I could pay the electric bill. I thought about the mornings I woke up shivering because the heater gave out again and I couldn't afford a repairman. I thought about every single time I had swallowed my pride and stayed silent, thinking that if I just waited, if I just worked harder, if I just kept being the good son, maybe, eventually, they would see me. And here they were, tossing out the kind of money that could have saved my whole year on a luxury vacation for the son who never needed to struggle a day in his life. I drove home with the windows down even though the rain stung my face like tiny needles, because I needed to feel something real, something sharp, something that wasn't just another numb ache under my ribs. My apartment greeted me the way it always did, a flickering hallway light, the low hum of a neighbor's TV leaking through the thin walls, the faint stink of something rotting in the trash chute. I peeled off my wet jacket, sat on the edge of my sad excuse for a bed, and stared at the cracked paint on the ceiling until it blurred into something ugly and endless. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even move. I just sat there, hollowed out, counting all the times I had told myself it wasn't personal, that parents weren't supposed to play favorites, that maybe I was imagining it all. But you can't argue with first-class tickets. You can't reason away a private tour guide in Italy when you can't even afford a new set of tires for your beater car. You can't tell yourself you matter when the people who made you treat you like an obligation they forgot to cancel. That night, for the first time in my life, I stopped lying to myself. I realized they were never going to choose me, not really, not in the way I needed them to, not in the way that said, "You matter as much as he does." I realized that I could keep breaking my back trying to earn a love that was never going to be given freely, or I could finally choose myself. So I chose myself. And everything after that changed. There are nights in your life that carve themselves into the walls of your memory so deep that no amount of time can ever sand them down smooth again, and that night after the call was one of them. A scar I would carry inside me forever no matter how many miles I put between myself and the people who gave it to me. I barely remember walking through the door of my apartment, barely remember tossing my keys onto the cracked counter or kicking off my soaked shoes, but I remember the rage like it was a living thing, pacing the floors with me, pounding against the inside of my chest until I thought it might split me wide open. I punched the wall without thinking, skin tearing on the rough plaster, a raw, ugly bloom of blood and anger that didn't even register against the bigger hurt clawing up my throat. I screamed into the battered throw pillow on the couch, screamed until my voice cracked and my lungs burned, until my heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape the prison I had built around it for 3 goddamn decades. The neighbors probably heard me, but nobody came knocking, nobody cared, and honestly, it felt fitting. Just one more echo of the truth I had spent my whole life pretending wasn't real. I sat on the floor, back against the cold wall, and let the memories come, let them crash over me like a tide I was too tired to fight anymore. I saw my 8th birthday again, sitting on the cracked front steps while Ryan rode circles around me on his brand new bike, the one with the sparkling streamers and the horn that shrieked like victory every time he squeezed it. I saw my high school graduation, scanning the crowd for a familiar face that never showed up because Ryan had a baseball game they couldn't miss. I heard the brittle, forced enthusiasm in Mom's voice every time she tried to remember what it was I was studying, what job I was working, who I was even trying to be. It wasn't just the big moments they missed, it was the 1,000 tiny ones, the everyday absences that cut deeper than any grand betrayal ever could. It was the empty chairs at school plays, the forgotten birthdays, the way my victories were treated like inconveniences while Ryan's smallest accomplishments were celebrated like he had cured cancer. It was the knowledge, clear and sharp as glass, that no matter what I did, it would never be enough to make them look at me the way they looked at him. And somewhere in the middle of all that wreckage, a cold, brutal clarity settled over me, a voice inside me speaking louder and clearer than it ever had before. "You have 2 choices," it said, "and only 2. You can stay here, stay in this city, stay tethered to these people who will never see you, who will never love you in the way you deserve to be loved, and you can rot from the inside out, one slow, bitter day at a time. Or you can walk away. For good. It wasn't an easy choice, not really, because even broken love is still love, and even hollow families still leave holes when you rip yourself away from them. But as I sat there bleeding from my knuckles and choking on years of swallowed disappointment, I realized that the harder choice, the one that would hurt like hell at first, was the only one that might actually save me. I stood up on shaky legs and looked around my sad little apartment, really looked at it for the first time in months. The peeling paint, the sagging furniture, the box of bills on the counter that I had stopped even trying to open. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was the place where I had fought and bled and clawed for every inch of ground under my feet. It was the place where I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who teach you how to survive without them. I walked into the bedroom, pulled out an old duffel bag from under the bed, and started packing. Not much, a few changes of clothes, my beat-up laptop, the photo of me and my best friend Tom that had somehow survived 3 moves and a flood. Everything else could rot here with the memories I was leaving behind. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, didn't have a grand plan or a safety net to catch me, but for the first time in my life, the not knowing didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. As I zipped the bag shut, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. I barely recognized the man staring back at me, thinner than he should be, darker under the eyes, harder around the mouth, but there was something fierce there too, something I hadn't seen in a long, long time. It wasn't hope exactly, and it sure as hell wasn't happiness, but it was something close to defiance. A stubborn refusal to keep playing a rigged game. I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and a piece of paper and started writing the letter that would be the last thing I ever said to them. It wasn't an angry letter, not really, and it wasn't a plea either. It was the truth, plain and ugly and finally mine. But if I was leaving, I wasn't leaving quietly. The morning after I made my decision, the world looked different, sharper somehow, like someone had pulled a dirty film off my eyes and left me staring at a place I barely recognized. I woke up stiff and sore from sleeping on the floor, the half-packed duffel bag a silent reminder of the choice I had made, a choice that buzzed through my veins with the kind of adrenaline you get standing on the edge of a rooftop, one step away from either flying or falling. I knew if I stopped moving, if I sat still too long and let the fear sink its teeth into me, I might start second-guessing everything, so I didn't give myself the chance. I started with the easy things, the small things, the things I knew nobody would miss. I went through my closet and pulled out every piece of clothing that didn't serve a purpose, the old button-downs I never wore, the suits from interviews that ended in nothing, the ratty sneakers with holes in the soles. I stuffed them into garbage bags and hauled them down to the thrift store on the corner, walking away with a few crumpled bills and a feeling like I had just peeled off a layer of dead skin. Next came the furniture, if you could even call it that, the wobbly kitchen table, the mattress that sagged in the middle like a tired sigh, the mismatched chairs I had scavenged from curbside trash piles over the years. I posted them online for dirt cheap, cash only, and watched strangers pick through the sad remains of my life like vultures at a roadside accident. Every piece that left the apartment made it a little more hollow, a little more real, like I was erasing myself one broken thing at a time. Quitting my jobs was easier than I thought it would be. No grand speeches, no drama. I just walked into the diner, handed my apron to the manager with a nod, and walked right back out before he could even ask why. At the grocery store, I left my name tag on the break room table with a scrap of paper that said, "Thanks for nothing," because even though I wasn't usually the type for petty gestures, something inside me wanted to leave a small scar on the place that had drained me dry for minimum wage and zero gratitude. With every step, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time, like I was shedding a skin, but also gathering the weight of all the years I had spent pretending I wasn't dying inside. It was terrifying, sure, and reckless, and probably the dumbest thing I had ever done if you asked anyone who had never lived my life, but it also felt inevitable, like I had never really had a choice at all. Some roads you don't choose to walk. They just show up under your feet when you realize standing still is worse than falling. I found a new city by closing my eyes and stabbing my finger at a map taped up in the diner office 2 nights before I quit. It was a mid-sized place a few hours away, far enough to make visits inconvenient, but not so far that it felt like running away to another planet. I found a listing online for a dirt-cheap studio apartment over an abandoned laundromat, a place where the wallpaper peeled like sunburned skin and the pipes rattled when the wind blew too hard. Perfect, I thought. It was perfect because it was mine, and nobody would follow me there unless they had a damn good reason. There was still one thing left to do, though, the thing that mattered more than any of the rest of it, the letter. The last conversation I would ever have with them, the only way I could make them listen to me when they had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of looking right through me. I sat at the bare kitchen table, a battered notebook in front of me, a pen that scratched and stuttered across the page, and I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes burned. I didn't hold anything back, not this time. I wrote about every Christmas morning where Ryan's laughter filled the house and my silence went unnoticed. I wrote about the birthday cards that never came, the applause that was always for someone else, the way they built Ryan up so high that the rest of us lived in his shadow whether we wanted to or not. I wrote about the night I realized a luxury vacation for him was worth more to them than helping me fix a car that was my only way to survive. I wrote about the countless times I had swallowed my pride, my hurt, my anger, just to stay part of a family that had decided long ago that I was optional. But I also wrote about the good memories, because it wasn't all bad, and pretending it would have been another kind of lie. I wrote about the nights Dad stayed up late, helping me build model airplanes, the mornings Mom made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs even though she hated cooking. I wrote about the way Ryan used to sneak into my room when he was scared of thunderstorms, curling up at the foot of my bed like a puppy who didn't know he was going to outgrow me someday. I ended the letter with the truth I had never been brave enough to say out loud. I love you. I always have. But I'm done begging for scraps of the love you gave him without hesitation. I'm done pretending that being second place is enough. I'm choosing myself now because you never did. I folded the pages carefully, like they were something sacred, and slid them into an envelope addressed to Mom and Dad, because no matter how angry I was, no matter how hurt, I still couldn't bring myself to call them by their real names, the way you might with strangers. I left the envelope on the kitchen table, weighed down by the battered snow globe Ryan had given me when he was 6, the one souvenir of a time when maybe, just maybe, he had loved me without conditions. As I locked the door behind me and walked out into the bruised blue light of early dawn, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That life was done, buried under the weight of 1,000 unspoken words finally given voice. They thought I'd just disappear, like a stain you could scrub out if you scrubbed hard enough. They had no idea what was coming. The morning they landed back from whatever slice of paradise they had decided to spoil Ryan with, the house was not the warm, bustling homecoming scene they probably imagined it would be. Filled with laughter and the smells of coffee brewing and the familiar scratch of suitcase wheels on hardwood floors. Instead, it was cold and hollow, every sound amplified in the emptiness, the way an abandoned church echoes, even when you whisper. The front door creaked open on hinges that needed oiling, and for a long moment, neither of them moved, like some part of them already knew, deep in their bones, that something was wrong. The air was heavy, not with dust, but with something heavier, like the ghosts of conversations never had and apologies never made. Mom called my name out once, her voice just a little too high, a little too eager, already trying to fill the silence with something normal before it swallowed her whole. Dad grunted, hauling their suitcases inside, the wheels thumping dully against the floorboards that I had memorized like a second skin when I was a boy. They wandered into the kitchen, looking for signs of life, maybe hoping I was just out grabbing coffee or taking a walk or doing whatever sons who are forgotten until convenient tend to do. But there was no steaming mug left on the counter, no half-finished crossword puzzle waiting to be solved, no scrawled note promising to be back soon. There was only the table, bare except for one object placed dead center like a tombstone, an envelope, thick and heavy, my name in careful, deliberate handwriting across the front. For a few minutes, they didn't touch it, just stood there like it was a bomb they weren't sure how to disarm. I imagine Mom's hands trembled when she finally reached out, fingertips brushing the paper like it might bite her. I imagine Dad's jaw tightened the way it always did when he didn't want anyone to know he was scared. They opened it together, side by side like they were facing a firing squad, and maybe in a way, they were. The first words must have hit like a slap. This isn't a goodbye because you can't say goodbye to people who never truly saw you to begin with. I pictured Mom's face crumpling, the way it used to when Ryan scraped his knee, only this time there was no Band-Aid big enough to cover the wound. I pictured Dad setting his jaw even harder, bracing himself against the avalanche he could no longer outrun. I laid everything out for them, line by brutal line, the favoritism so blatant it might as well have been written in neon across every memory we ever shared. I wrote about the holidays where my seat was an afterthought, about the birthdays remembered too late or not at all, about the aching, endless hunger to be seen that had shaped every desperate choice I had made since I was old enough to realize that love in our family came with conditions I could never meet. I wrote about Ryan, of course I did, but not to blame him. He was a symptom, not the disease. I told them how it felt to stand in his shadow my entire life, to be handed hand-me-down dreams while he got the brand new ones still wrapped in shiny paper. I told them how much it hurt to realize that love was not infinite after all, that there was only so much to go around, and somehow I had always been standing on the wrong side of the line. But it wasn't just a list of grievances, not some petty inventory of slights and injustices. It was a eulogy for the family I had wanted, the one I had spent 32 years chasing like a ghost through an endless, empty house. It was the last gift I could give them, the truth stripped down to the bone, ugly and real and impossible to ignore. Toward the end, I softened, because despite everything, I knew that part of me would always ache for them, would always crave the approval that had been dangled in front of me like a carrot just out of reach. I told them I hoped they would be happy, that they would find peace with the son they had chosen, that they would build a life full of the things they valued most. I told them I loved them because love doesn't die just because it is unreturned, and I wasn't willing to lie even in the last sentence I would ever write to them. And then I gave them the final blow, the line that would echo through the empty rooms long after the last suitcase was unpacked. You never lost a son. You never even saw him. I imagine there was a moment of silence after they finished reading, the kind that stretches out so long it starts to fray at the edges of sanity. I imagine Mom crumpled into one of the chairs, clutching the letter like it might change if she just held it tight enough. I imagine Dad stood there stiff and useless, wishing he could fix it with a stern word or a pat on the back, the way he used to when Ryan failed a test or missed a goal. But there was no fixing this. No apology big enough, no gesture grand enough, no sudden revelation that could roll back 32 years of being the afterthought, the placeholder, the one who didn't matter quite enough. They could frame that letter, burn it, shred it into 1,000 pieces, it didn't matter. The words were written now, carved into the history of us like graffiti on a crumbling wall. By the time they stumbled back into their world of private tours and first-class lounges, I was already gone, a ghost they helped create, a reminder that sometimes the people you think will stay forever are the ones who leave when you stop seeing them as real. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't leave a phone number. I didn't leave a way back. You'd think that'd be the end of it. It wasn't. In the days that followed my disappearance, the world did not end, the sun did not fall from the sky, and the city did not grind to a halt because one more broken son decided he had finally had enough. Life, in its cold and relentless way, moved on, and so did I, setting up my existence in that cracked little studio apartment above the abandoned laundromat, where the nights smelled like dust and old soap, and the mornings were always filled with the desperate clatter of pigeons on the windowsill. I thought, for a brief and stupid moment, that maybe that would be it, that I had cut the cord cleanly, that I had slipped free of them like a snake shedding its old skin, and that they would simply shrug and move on without me, the way they had always done when I was inconvenient or invisible. But people, even the ones who hurt you, have a funny way of not letting you go so easily when they realize you were serious about leaving. The first call came 3 days after I left, a missed call from my mother's number that I stared at for a full 10 minutes without answering, the phone buzzing itself into silence on the rickety nightstand. I didn't listen to the voicemail right away because part of me wasn't ready to hear whatever blend of confusion, anger, and forced cheerfulness she was going to try to lay over the wreckage. Instead, I let the calls pile up, one after another like little ghosts wailing for attention in the dark. Mom left 3 voicemails in the first week, her voice changing with each one, the first light and joking, like maybe I was just being dramatic and she could fix it with a little motherly nagging. The second tight and wounded, full of sharp little jabs about how worried they were and how ungrateful I was being. The third one broken and trembling, the sound of a woman realizing she had lost something she couldn't name, pleading with me to call home, just to talk, just to explain. I never heard my father's voice, not directly, because pride is a hell of a drug, and he had always been better at staying silent than admitting he might have been wrong about anything. Instead, I got a few terse text messages, stiff and impersonal, things like, "Please call your mother," and "Let's talk when you're ready." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the expectation that I would come crawling back once I got the anger out of my system, because that's what good sons are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to forgive and forget, and pretend the years of being treated like a footnote never happened. Ryan, predictably, responded in the only way he knew how, by posting a series of sun-drenched photos from Bali on his social media, grinning against backdrops of crystal-clear waters and lush green cliffs, looking for all the world like the happiest man alive. No message, no text, not even a cheap little "hey, you good?" thrown into my inbox. He posted selfies with monkeys, sunsets over rice fields, plates of tropical fruit arranged like art installations, and all of it screamed the same thing louder than words ever could. David who? Watching him from afar was like pressing my hand against a window pane in the dead of winter, the cold seeping in no matter how hard I tried to pretend I didn't feel it. There was grief, of course. Grief for the brother I had once imagined might someday stand beside me instead of above me. Grief for the parents who would never be the people I needed them to be. Grief for the boy I had been who still, deep down, believed that love was something you could earn if you just tried hard enough. There was anger too, hot and biting, a wildfire inside my ribs that burned through every rational thought I tried to build like a house of cards. But underneath it all, there was something else, something quieter and stronger and stranger. There was freedom. Freedom in the way the silence wrapped around me like a cloak instead of a noose. Freedom in the way every missed call and unanswered email proved that I had finally broken the pattern. Freedom in knowing that I was no longer standing in the middle of a burning house screaming for someone to save me when I could have walked out the front door all along. That freedom didn't feel clean or easy or triumphant. It felt messy and raw, like pulling a splinter the size of a railroad spike out of your own skin. It bled and it hurt and it left a scar, but it was mine and nobody could take it from me again. I spent a lot of nights staring at the cracked ceiling of my new place, wondering if they were staring at their own ceilings, reading and rereading my letter, picking apart every word, looking for the loophole that would let them blame me instead of themselves. Sometimes, late at night when the city settled into its own exhausted silence, I would catch myself almost reaching for the phone, almost dialing the familiar numbers just to hear a voice that once meant safety, once meant home. But then I would remember the sound of Mom's voice lighting up when she talked about Ryan's next big adventure, the way Dad's eyes always drifted past me to wherever Ryan was standing, the way I had always been the background noise to someone else's highlight reel. And I would put the phone down, turn off the light, and remind myself that survival sometimes means choosing your own peace over someone else's comfort. They thought the letter was the end of the conversation, a final period on a life they had already half forgotten. They had no idea that the real conversation had only just begun, not between us, but inside me, in the quiet spaces where love and anger and grief all tangled together into something I was still trying to name. And still, part of me wonders if I did the right thing. The days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months, and the life I built for myself in that crumbling little apartment took shape slowly, like a half-forgotten song trying to find its melody again after years of silence. I found a new job, nothing glamorous, just unloading trucks at a warehouse on the edge of town where nobody cared about my last name, or what college I didn't go to, or which golden boy brother I was related to. I learned the streets by heart, the coffee shops that didn't mind if you sat for hours nursing a single cup, the parks where the old men played chess like it was a war they refused to lose, the broken sidewalks where weeds forced their way up through the cracks like tiny acts of rebellion. It was a kind of peace, sure, but it was the kind of peace that feels like sitting in a boat in the middle of a vast, empty lake, where the water is so still it becomes a mirror and all you can see when you look down is yourself staring back at you, asking questions you are too afraid to answer. There were no dramatic reunions, no tearful apologies, no swelling music playing as someone realized the error of their ways and came running after me with arms wide open. There was just me, and the silence, and the slow, steady beat of a life that no longer revolved around being someone else's second choice. I would be lying if I said there were no moments when the loneliness wrapped itself around my ribs so tight that I could barely breathe, moments when I missed them so badly it felt like a physical wound that throbbed beneath my skin. I missed the smell of Sunday pancakes, the creaky sound of the porch swing at dusk, the stupid inside jokes that only made sense if you had spent a lifetime hearing them over dinner tables and car rides and Christmas mornings. But the thing I missed most wasn't them, it was the idea of them, the people I had wanted them to be, the family I had built in my head like a fortress against all the times they had let me fall. There were nights I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying the last few months like a movie stuck on repeat, asking myself the same endless questions that had no clean answers. Should I have confronted them face to face, forced them to hear the words instead of hiding them in a letter they could choose to crumple up or burn or pretend never existed? Should I have forgiven them even if they never asked for forgiveness, even if they never understood what they had done, because forgiveness is supposed to be for the forgiver, not the forgiven? Sometimes I thought about what it would have been like to stay, to keep playing my part in the broken little family drama we had written together over 32 years. Maybe if I had stayed, I could have worn them down, chipped away at their blind spots until they finally saw me standing there. Maybe I could have made them love me the way they loved him. Maybe I could have earned my way into a place I had been born thinking was already mine. But deep down, in the part of me that refused to be lied to anymore, I knew the truth. Staying would not have changed them. It would have changed me, and not in the way that people mean when they talk about growing stronger or wiser or more resilient. It would have hollowed me out, turned me into something small and brittle and bitter, a man who spent his life trying to be good enough for people who had already decided he wasn't. I started writing sometimes, not the angry, sharp-edged words I had poured into the letter, but softer things, quieter things, observations about the city, about the people who moved through it like ghosts and angels, about the stubborn, aching beauty of a world that does not care who you are but still gives you sunrises and strangers who hold doors open and dogs that wag their tails at you like you're somebody worth noticing. It didn't fix everything, but it helped fill the spaces they had left behind with something that didn't bleed when you touched it. Once, months later, I saw a family at a diner, a mother, a father, 2 boys about 10 and 12 laughing over a pile of pancakes and bacon, the younger boy swinging his legs under the table, the older one nudging him with an elbow and a grin. For a moment, something inside me twisted so hard it felt like it might tear me apart, because that was the picture I had chased my whole life, the one I had believed was waiting for me if I just tried hard enough. And then the moment passed, and I paid my check, and I walked out into the bright, blinding sunlight without looking back. I don't know if what I did was right or wrong. I don't know if cutting them out of my life was an act of selfishness or survival, or maybe it was both. tangled together like all the complicated, messy things that make us human. Some days I think I should have fought harder, stayed longer, tried one more time to make them hear me. Other days I know with bone-deep certainty that walking away was the bravest thing I have ever done, even if it broke something in me that might never fully heal. Sometimes leaving isn't revenge. Sometimes it's just the only way to survive. And if that makes me cruel, then maybe cruelty is just another name for choosing yourself when no one else ever did.